Hello and welcome. This is GSBA 518, Economics in a Global Environment, here hosted at the University of San Diego's School of Business Administration. And my name is Dr. Steve Lefkoff, and I will be administering this offering of the course. So welcome. Hope everybody had a wonderful break and that you are ready to get back to being productive. So first thing we're going to do tonight is just give you a little overview of the course, a little background on myself. Just a little bit about me. I did my bachelor's in applied math and economics. I did my master's and my PhD work in economics as well. So I am a trained economist. I have over a decade of experience teaching at the university level. I also teach at the University of California, San Diego. And I also am involved in teaching in the data science and analytics programs at USD, which draws on some of the private sector experience that I have in analytics and data science in the tech space. I also hold a certified analytics professional designation. So if you thought it was a CPA, I'm actually not an accountant. I'm essentially a certified data scientist. And in my free time, I actually like to train judo and jujitsu. I am the coach and instructor of the judo and jiu-jitsu programs at USD, and that tends to keep me active and limber in the off hours. In terms of what we're going to do in this course, so the focus of this course is to understand how individuals, governments, and market agents respond to and evaluate the domestic and global forces causing economic change. Key concepts and ideas from both microeconomics and macroeconomics are utilized. The course begins with an understanding of some common microeconomic issues framed in the context of the perfectly competitive market model, and then discussing cases of market failures and more complex departures from the competitive market framework. Global issues are emphasized, such as the role that interest rates and exchange rates play in the movement of goods and capital between countries, national income and balance of payment accounting, trade barriers, regional trade agreements, emerging markets, and political risk. So there's quite a bit. First half of the course is going to focus more on microeconomic concepts. The second half of the course is going to focus more on macroeconomic concepts, and we'll discuss the differences between those shortly. Okay, so next thing we want to discuss is, why even think about studying economics? Why is it important? And why should you care? And there are quite a few typical responses to this question of thinking about what motivates a particular person to want to study economics. And if you're thinking to yourself, probably the number one answer that I get to this question is folks want to make money. They want to get paid, and they think that learning about how markets work and how money functions may help them do this. And that's a pretty typical rational motivator, especially for a business student, to make money. Along the same lines, folks tend to also want to be employable when they get out of the business program. They want to get a job. And this also goes along the line with bullet point number one, making money here. I get quite a few individuals that are interested in going into public policy, some do-gooders. And at the extreme end of that spectrum, there's people that even want to maybe change or try to save the world. These are all great motivations for wanting to study economics. There's always some individuals that have to take it. And hopefully, if that is you, I will try to keep you awake and keep you interested throughout the duration of this course. So now that we discussed what your motivation might be, let me tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from and what I would like you to get out of this course. So my goals for the course, first and foremost, are to enhance your decision-making capabilities. I want to make you a better decision maker. We'll talk about what that means in the next few lectures and in some of your MindTap videos as you go through your reading exercises when it comes to doing things like thinking at the margin, optimizing, and acting like a rational individual. The next goal that I have is to enhance your economic intuition. Economics, for as cryptic of a subject as it can be, I believe, and a lot of my colleagues also believe, that if taught properly, you can convey quite a bit of intuitive information in studying economics. And the third objective that I have in teaching this course is I want to prepare you for the next step. And whether that's more graduate school, more education, or applying this to your private life, we want you to be able to take this knowledge and extrapolate it. Last but not least, maybe we'll have some fun. I hope we do. I hope you enjoy the course as much as I do teaching it, because this is a really fun course. So now that we know what my goals are, let's talk a little bit about exactly what we are going to be doing here in studying economics. So in order to study economics, you cannot get away from the idea of scarcity, which is basically recognizing that we face some finite constraint in the world around us. Whether it's time or whether it's the physical limitations on resources that are available on this planet, we are constrained. And what economics does is essentially it studies how society manages its resources. How does society make decisions, whether individual or collective, in a way to allocate its scarce resources in the face of these finite constraints. So we're talking about questions related to, how do people decide what to buy? How much should I work? How much money should I save? How much should I spend? How do firms and sellers decide how much goods and services to produce? How many workers to hire to achieve a particular level of production? Or even explaining maybe more complicated issues like how society decides how to divide its resources between things like national defense, consumer goods, environmental protection, or maybe any other sources that would detract from achieving those particular goals. You may often hear of economics referred to as the dismal science, maybe in the media or other background readings. And the reason why it's often referred to as the dismal science is because thinking about the question of resource scarcity takes it as a premise, the idea that we're eventually going to run out of stuff, of resources. And that's why it's kind of known as the dismal science. Despite that, economists are fairly happy people. So I want to just spend a little bit of time discussing the major differences between these two core branches of economics, microeconomics and macroeconomics, because the course is more or less split 50-50 down the line between these two branches. We both take a micro and a macro perspective on the economy and global issues that we're going to think about. So microeconomics, let's start there. Keyword micro. So the prefix there, root micro, hopefully it's pretty obvious that we're going to think about small scale interaction, specifically the study of how individuals are making decisions in this environment constrained by resource scarcity. And which individuals are we thinking about? First, we're going to be thinking about consumers. At the same time, we are going to be thinking about producers, really the two sides of the market. We have the buyers on one side, sellers on the other. And depending on which market we're referring to, consumers could potentially be buyers or sellers in a market, just like producers. I'll come back to that point a little bit later. Macroeconomics, on the other hand, is a little bit broader in scope. Macro means big. And when we're thinking about macroeconomics, we're studying aggregate economic activity. We're studying economic activity that has been aggregated or summed up over the entire economy. So macroeconomics is involved with answering questions like understanding how printing money translates into inflation and whether or not that helps unemployment. Or how does a country's standard of living depend on its access to technology and its access to factors of production like labor, capital, natural resources. Okay, so these are distinct branches of economics, but despite that, they're closely interrelated. They do focus on answering slightly different questions, but both perspectives are going to be extremely useful for us in this course. So we are going to start off taking a micro perspective, thinking about how individuals make decisions. And the first key idea to understand in thinking about how individuals make decisions is understanding the idea that people face trade-offs. Okay, when it comes to thinking about individual behavior and individual choices, people always face a trade-off. Any decision that you make, any choice that you make, okay, given that you're making a choice, you have multiple options. Choosing one option necessarily means that there are other options that you are giving up. Any decision involves a trade-off. Okay, a couple examples you might think about and that could be relevant to you and to this course is, it's the night before an exam and you could consider going out, maybe partying the night before the exam. However, the trade-off that you face, which is a time scarcity, which is constrained by time scarcity, is that you give up some potential studying time for that exam. So that's an example of one trade-off that you might face. Another trade-off I think that everybody's felt is that if you want more money to buy stuff, then you have to make sure you're putting in more hours to earn that income. There's a trade-off between labor and leisure. And if I want to be eating more food, I want to go out, and I want to have more fun and more money for activities, that requires me to work more. And again, I'm constrained by 24 hours in a day, and working more requires me necessarily to have less time to enjoy leisure activities. We mentioned this one before, but also, if you wanted to shift resources towards protecting the environment, this may require diverting resources, from pursuing other goals. So anytime you make a decision, anytime you make a choice, you are facing a trade-off. And this is one of the first important principles or first important key ideas in this course. We're going to spend quite a bit of time in this class talking about pi. And I don't mean the number pi. There's a little bit of a typo there. I mean pi like the food, like the dessert, like the pastry. And I'm going to use kind of a corny analogy, but often in certain cases, it's going to be convenient for us to think about the economy as generating this pie, this value of benefits for society. And the size of the pie that's generated depends on the efforts and the resources of all the people that are collectively baking this economic pie. And we're going to think about a couple important trade-offs related to the economic pie moving forward in the next couple lectures, building up to our first class meeting here. But in order to think about the trade-offs regarding the economic pie, we're going to introduce two concepts right now regarding how we're thinking about economic activity is generating benefits for society, and how we would like to characterize the objective for thinking about what policy should achieve. So the first objective, and this one economists are primarily concerned with, is known as efficiency. So anytime we're thinking about efficiency, what we're really referring to is trying to maximize the size of the economic pie. And that is the goal of efficiency. Anytime we have an improvement in efficiency, that means that the entire economic pie has gotten larger. We've gone from a very small pie to a situation where now the pie has gotten bigger. And this is one particular objective, right? We have this economy, this giant, all these people putting in their effort to bake this giant pie of value. And one thing economists want to do with the resources that we are given is we want to make sure that society is generating the biggest pie that it can with the scarce resources that we have access to. The other interesting criteria to think about from a policy perspective is not just the size of the pie, but perhaps related to how the pie is cut. So we're going to abuse this term a little bit. This is not a philosophy course. But we're going to think about the term equity as having to do not with the size of the pie, but more with how the pie is cut. Okay, so efficiency had to do with making the pie bigger. It's more concerned with the size of the economic pie. But equity, on the other hand, is more concerned with the cutting of the pie. Okay, a more equal cutting of the pie, we're going to denote as a more equitable outcome from an economic standpoint. So you could have a situation where, and this happened to me, I was at a party once and I saw a person at the party, they cut a piece of pie, they took what I thought was their piece, they put it aside and then took the whole remainder of the pie. And I was like, I couldn't believe somebody did that. But they pretty much allocated like 80% of the pie to themselves and left one tiny wedge for everybody else. And that was not really a very equitable distribution of that pie. I think the people hosting the event would have been very irritated if they had seen that occur. However, if we think about a pie being cut more evenly, such that the benefits from the economy, from that economic pie being baked by everybody collectively, are being more smoothly spread out across everyone, that would constitute a more equitable distribution. Okay, now, economists tend to be more concerned with efficiency. Politicians tend to be more concerned with equity. Equity will be important for us from thinking about how people will be motivated politically to support a policy or not. People tend to care not about the size of the entire economic pie, but about their slice of it. And that's kind of a tough reality to wrap your brain around, is that people fundamentally are somewhat selfish. And if they can do something to get a bigger piece of the pie, they may be willing to do that despite the fact that their action may cause the actual size of the pie to shrink. Point being that an important trade-off that society often faces is trying to make that pie big without making that pie unequally cut. And there's an important trade-off between efficiency and equity. Again, efficiency having to do with maximizing the size of the economic pies, making sure we're getting the most from the resources that we have. Equity, on the other hand, is concerned with making sure that these benefits are uniformly distributed across society. And one trade-off that we often face, and we often hear this a lot in political rhetoric, is that in trying to achieve greater equality, okay, for example, if we wanted to redistribute income in a way where after the fact we've smoothed out the income distribution so that we took the wealthy people's excess pieces of economic pie and we gave it to the poor people, this potentially reduces the incentive for everybody, the people receiving the transfer and the people having the transfer taken away from them to work. And because of that, for example, if I know I'm going to get a piece of economic pie without even having to do any work because somebody else is going to be forced to give it to me, the incentive is I don't work as hard to bake my piece of pie. And the person who's having their piece of pie taken away, they don't have an incentive to work as hard either. And the end result is that economic pie can potentially shrink if we try to trade off too much equity, the goal of equity at the sake of efficiency. So that's something we're going to analyze. Equity, again, is going to be very useful to think about people's political alignments. And efficiency is going to be mainly the perspective we're going to take. And we'll see more often than not, pursuing both of these goals at the same time may not be feasible. So this necessitates a trade-off between them. Okay, another general theme that we're going to come across in this course is that there is an important perspective on markets. Okay, so I just wanted to discuss a couple terms here as precursors. There's the free market versus this idea of a regulated market where the government has maybe intervened or put some rule in play. But first and foremost, the free market is kind of a myth in that every market is predicated on a set of rules. What can sellers do and what can buyers do legally? In the United States, this set of rules upon which all markets are built are known as property rights. And these are pretty much one of the most fundamental rights as being able to operate in an American market. Without property rights, what does it mean to even sell a good if you don't own it, if someone can just take it from you? So the idea of a free market is just that. It's kind of an idea. It's an extreme end of some sort of spectrum. In the regulated market, is kind of on the opposite end of that extreme when it comes to thinking about the government trying to intervene in that market to manipulate the outcome. So regulated market means the government's there. The free market means the government is not really there, but keep in mind, all markets are predicated on some rules. There's not really a purely free market. Okay, the other idea that we're going to discuss is that markets, if they're known or characterized as competitive markets, they tend to allocate resources really well. Specifically, they allocate resources efficiently, meaning that when we look at the outcome from a market interaction, from a trade taking place, the economic pie from that trade winds up being maximized using the competitive market mechanism. And just to be clear right up front, there is no other mechanism that has pulled more people out of poverty or led to greater economic growth and standards of living ever. Okay, so the market mechanism is an extremely well-functioning mechanism. We will start off in this course analyzing the competitive market model, with both sides, the buyer side and the seller side, have lots and lots and lots of agents, meaning the markets are really, really big, lots of people interacting. And one thing we will notice is that in this situation, government intervention tends to cause problems in that when the government intervenes, the pie tends to shrink. Okay, but this is only part of the story. Okay, sometimes markets are good, as in the case of a competitive market, but in other instances, markets can potentially fail to allocate resources efficiently. And in cases when the market does fail to do this, we refer to these situations as market failures. And market failures take place in really one of 5 situations. You can kind of pin the sources of market failure down to the following. You have monopolization of industries, okay, where either a buyer or potentially a seller gets too much market power, negotiating power concentrated around themselves. And this really has to do with the size of an industry being too small. Externalities are situations where you have spillover effects from one person's consumption or production of a good, such that the individual does not fully internalize all of the cost and benefits of their action. Public goods and common property or other situations where a free market mechanism does not do a great job in allocating resources, which is why, for example, the government collects funds to provide military protection. And also asymmetric information, scenarios where buyers know more than sellers about the nature of a transaction, or potentially vice versa. Maybe a seller knows more about the buyer. For example, the seller of a used car knows the quality of the vehicle they were driving in. The buyer has no idea. The buyer can go online and look at the average vehicle, but doesn't know at a particular lot what the quality of the vehicle is they are going to buy. In situations where markets fail due to the presence of one of these sources of market failures, a completely natural solution is to invoke government intervention to potentially improve these outcomes. So a big idea that I would like to convey to you throughout this course is that while markets are good, sometimes they don't work. Okay, so my perspective isn't markets are always good, government intervention is always good. Sometimes markets are good and they work well, sometimes they don't. And it's important to understand the cases when they do, so we can kind of let the market do the work itself, and to differentiate those from cases where there may be a source of market failure, which generally would necessitate some form of government intervention. So we are going to continue with this discussion momentarily. The next video that I would like you to watch is going to help you navigate the course a little bit, show you what the blackboard looks like so you can poke around in there. We'll take just a quick glance at the syllabus. You can download that and read through that, but a couple key items to look at are the dates for the paper and the exams. Core of next video is going to be focused on getting you set up in Cengage's MindTap, which pairs with your course textbook in a very fluid way. So you got to get registered there, poke around in the dashboard, and understand how to submit your homeworks. All the homework submissions are through the online course platform on MindTap. And we'll also discuss what you should be working on for next week. I know we don't meet physically for 2 weeks, but it's really crucially important that you guys get through all of the resources provided in MindTab and on the syllabus and in my supplemental videos. That way, everybody will be prepared at the same level for when we meet for the first class session. So that is it for this video. Hope to see you guys soon. Have a good one. See you shortly.